Yeah, this is the incredible thing. There's evidence that has come out just in the past couple of years that we've seen people actually reversing signs of brain aging and early dementia. So a friend of mine ran a study out of University of Washington looking at people that were on exercise versus not and brain MRI longitudinally. And they showed with just 25 extra minutes of exercise a week, people were able to increase their brain volume on MRI. So they're literally growing back their brain. So if you get a NeuroAge test and you see some of your brain volume is below average or, less than where you would want it to be, even just getting an extra 25 minutes of exercise, you may be able to get retested and show that you've moved that needle and increased the volume. So that's one thing. There's also uh, now there's randomized controlled studies that are about to be published, but there's an anecdote from a gentleman in Florida who was really high risk for Alzheimer's. So he had two ApoE4 alleles. And even in his 50s, he was already testing positive for those toxic proteins that build up in the brain, amyloid and tau. And he underwent dramatic lifestyle improvements, really went at it with exercise and diet and lost a bunch of weight and did all the things you're supposed to do and got retested and showed that he was no longer testing positive for those toxic proteins, which is really remarkable.
Hello, Dr. Glorioso. You are a neuroscientist and the co-founder and CEO of NeuroAge Therapeutics, which is a company dedicated to understanding and fighting brain aging. So welcome to Modern Healthspan, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So, Dr. Glorioso, can you provide a little of your background? So why did you choose to study the brain, and what led you to found NeuroAge?
Yeah, so everything that I've done in my career is really related back to my own family history of Alzheimer's disease. So when I was a kid, my grandmother suffered from Alzheimer's. My grandfather took care of her in the home. This had a really big impact on me and the rest of the family. I think it's even often harder on caregivers than it is on the people themselves with Alzheimer's disease. And now, unfortunately, it's in the next generation. So I have an aunt who's late stage with Alzheimer's. And in the course of starting the company, I found out that I myself have a genetic risk factor that puts me at higher risk for Alzheimer's disease in my 70s or 80s. So I have the most common genetic risk factor for Alzheimer's, which is an ApoE4 allele. About 25% of people have at least one copy. It puts you at 2 to 3 times the risk. So my whole career, I've been studying what happens during normal brain aging. Before starting NeuroAge, I completed an MD and a PhD in neuroscience from University of Pittsburgh. And then I went on to MIT to continue to study brain aging. And previously, I was head of AI of a Stanford spinout before starting NeuroAge about 3.5 years ago. And our mission is to really help people prevent Alzheimer's disease. So recent studies have shown that you can really slow down brain aging or even reverse some of it, and that can be very effective in preventing a lot of the risk associated with Alzheimer's, even if you have genetic risk factors like I do.
Are you are you targeting kind of dementia in general or Alzheimer's specifically?
Yeah, so dementia is an umbrella term. So there's many different types of dementia. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, frontotemporal dementia, vascular dementia. And we are targeting brain aging, which is a risk factor for all of them. So any age-related neuro disorder.
So how does the brain age? So you've looked at the brain aging. So what changes happen and how do you see them?
I've spent most of my career studying human postmortem brains. So people die, they donate their brains to science. You go to the scene of a car accident or a hospital room, and families will donate their brains. And we get those brains and we can see what's happening as the brain ages. And one very significant thing that happens is the brain shrinks. And that's due to loss of neurons, loss of connections between neurons. You can see that in postmortem brains. You can also see it on MRI, which is part of our testing, this shrinkage. So that's one thing that happens. There are also what's known on a cellular level as the hallmarks of brain aging. So there are processes that are happening within your neurons, within your immune cells in the brain, glia cells, that contribute to those neurons and glia becoming less functional. That includes DNA damage, mitochondrial dysfunction, inflammation, loss of synapses or the processes between neurons. So all of that is happening with age. And brain aging really starts in your 20s. So it's a process that's continuous throughout your life.
And you can still see these results kind of post-mortem, right? The chemical processes are still going on to some degree.
Yeah, if you get those brains soon enough. So if you get them within 24 hours and you freeze them down, you can look at all of the RNA, all of the proteins. You can see what's happening within cells. What's remarkable is you can even culture neurons from recently deceased brains. So someone dies, you can take a piece of their brain and grow it in a dish in the laboratory, and they'll stay alive for a little while, and you can do great experiments on real human brain cells. So we're not completely shut down for at least 24 hours in most of our organs.
So what modulates the speed of the brain aging? I mean, how much is lifestyle? How much is genetic? Is there anything else?
Yeah, so brain aging is about 60% genetic, 40% lifestyle. So there's this huge actionable piece, that 40%. And it's a big question as to why brain aging happens, what's driving it. And my leading theory is that it's a program. So I'm on the camp of people that believes in brain aging being a program like development. So even continuing from developmental processes. So, when you're a teenager, your brain is kind of overwired. So if you do functional MRI studies and you give a teenager a task, some mental task to do in an MRI machine, they'll recruit all the areas of their brain. It'll be kind of inefficient using all of these parts. And then as you get older in your 20s, you start to become more efficient. You'll recruit less parts of the brain. And so that's actually good. And you're pruning, the spines on your neurons in order to do that. And that's positive because you're becoming more efficient. But if that process keeps going on past your 20s, because there's no evolutionary stop guard on it, then it starts to become pathological and you prune too much and your neurons become too sparse. So that's, and the genes that are driving that program, it's called developmental drift. You're continuing development, throughout adulthood and old age. And so that's what I think is driving brain aging. Other people have different theories, buildup of inflammation, or it's all stochastic, random chance, DNA damage. So there's a lot of different theories, but that's the one that speaks to me based on my previous research.
Is anyone looking at how to turn off the genes that cause this drift?
Yes. So there's a lot of companies, not a lot, but a few companies that are working on what's known as epigenetic reprogramming. And so these are companies like Retro Biosciences and Altos Labs, which is, a Jeff Bezos funded company. And they're introducing the Yamanaka factors. So these are factors discovered by Shin Yamanaka, won the Nobel Prize about 15 years ago. And if you introduce these four transcription factors, you can turn any cell in your body back to a stem cell. And when you turn it back to a stem cell, you reset those developmental genes that are overactive. Now, you don't want to go all the way back to a stem cell because, if your whole body is a stem cell, that's a problem. So the reason it's partial reprogramming is that people are going just partway back to like a healthy young adult state, as opposed to fully back to a stem cell. And people are doing that by only putting these factors on for a short amount of time, or using less of them. or using different factors that are less extreme than the Yamanaka factors. So there's different ways that companies are working on this, but that would be the ultimate goal, is to take all of those changes that have gone too far in development and put them back to age 25.
And people are trying. I had heard of the partial reprogramming, so that people are trying this in the brain. I did not know that, although it kind of makes sense.
Yes, so far just in mice, but yes, that is the eventual goal, is to get to humans. Yeah.
Do you see a difference between the age of the brain and the health? Right. I mean, can you have an old and healthy brain, or are the two kind of the same?
Yeah, so what we see is that brain aging really starts at age 25. So you see these linear decreases in the size of the brain starting at that age and continuing on. You see the same thing at a molecular level. So increasing DNA damage is linearly happening since your 20s, mitochondrial dysfunction, these changes in these developmental genes. When someone starts to be at higher risk for Alzheimer's, you see an acceleration in those changes. So faster cognitive decline, faster losses in brain volumes. So it looks like, you're going along steadily and then there's a big drop. And so some people actually remain relatively unchanged throughout their life. So we all know these people. They're 95 and can still beat you in chess. They're sharp as a tack. And so what you see with those people is that, they maintain those brain volumes and those markers throughout their life. So their brains really do look younger. So it's both a combination of good genes and good lifestyle that gets people there.
Yeah. So the key markers that you're looking for are like the amyloid and the tau with relation to Alzheimer's and the buildup.
Yeah, so we know now that Alzheimer's is multifactorial. So amyloid and tau play a role, but they're definitely not the whole story. There are people that by brain imaging or by blood test, we see that they have a buildup of amyloid and tau, but they never end up having Alzheimer's and they're cognitively normal. So those people exist. So it's not the whole story. I think of amyloid and tau like cholesterol. You get your cholesterol tested. There's people with high cholesterol that never have a heart attack. But cholesterol is a risk factor for heart disease. So it's one risk factor amongst many. There are other risk factors, high blood pressure and smoking and how much you exercise and other things that contribute. It's the same thing for the brain. So amyloid and tau are risk factors. They're plaques that build up in the brain. But there's additional other factors, and brain aging itself is actually largely independent of that. So what we see is that brain aging is a really good predictor of Alzheimer's, but it is separate from amyloid and tau buildup. And if you put them together into the same predictive model, they make an even better predictor. So they look like separate pots of risk.
No, so I was thinking, right. So you're calculating the age, and you're also looking at the markers for Alzheimer's, and so this would give you a better way to predict the risk for a particular person, for them to have dementia in the future. Is that correct?
That's correct. So we have a test for brain aging. It combines brain MRI, so those brain volumes of 27 different brain regions, plus our own unique blood biomarkers. And I realize I didn't really go into that. I can explain a little bit more about that. Plus cognitive testing, so tests for memory and reaction time and other aspects of cognition that decline with age. And so we give people a different age score based on each three of them. So we think of it as structural, molecular, and functional. And those together combined make an even better predictor for how you're doing with your brain aging and your risk of future Alzheimer's. We have not added to our current testing, but plan to add it soon, the amyloid and tau tests, and that will make it an even more accurate predictor. So our blood biomarkers are unique to the company. They track the hallmarks of brain aging. So we first took those postmortem brains. We saw all of the genes that change up or down with age that are related to Alzheimer's and other diseases. So they're changing in directions that would predict to cause disease. We're able to predict how old the brain is chronologically from that set of markers really accurately. Then we went on to show that how old the brain is based on those markers in postmortem brain is a really good predictor of whether or not you're going to have Alzheimer's or not. So we showed that people that are 5 years younger in their biological brain age than their chronological age were 6 times less likely to have Alzheimer's disease. And they have better memory, better mood, less pre-Parkinson signs. So there are a whole host of benefits to that. And so then we went on to show that from blood, we could predict those brain ages. So this is what's known as a brain aging specific clock. There have been papers published recently that have gotten a lot of press from Tony Weiss-Corey's lab at Stanford, Organ Age Clocks, published in Nature a couple of years ago. So this is similar conceptually to that. So that's what our blood biomarkers are.
So let me just check. So the blood biomarkers have been shown to correlate with the changes that you saw in the brain before. And it may be causal, or it may just be a correlation, or it may be both.
It's a predictor. So some of our cohorts had both blood and brain. And so we were able to first predict how old people's brains were. And then we showed that those are a really good predictor of whether or not you have Alzheimer's. And then because it's not convenient or fair to people to take a piece of their brain who's alive, right? So we needed some way to translate that into living people. And so in some of our cohorts, we had both blood and brain. And using a set of 52 RNA markers from the blood, we were able to predict the thousands of markers in the brain that related to brain aging. So it's a proxy measurement, much in the same way the new Alzheimer's blood test, which is testing amyloid and tau in the blood, is a proxy for amyloid and tau in the brain. So it's a approximation based on blood testing.
So you have an aging clock for the brain, which gives you, I mean, it's kind of like the epigenetic clocks, but it's for the brain.
Exactly.
And all three parts go in to that, like the MRI, the blood markers, and the performance on computer games. Yeah. So do you also provide, like, as a separate thing, a risk for Alzheimer's, or would that require like FDA approval?
Yeah, so we're running a study, so it would require FDA approval. So we have to be careful about telling people risk for Alzheimer's. I mean, we do internally have those predictions, but we need FDA approval before we can tell people that. So we're running a study right now that's funded by the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation and Gates Ventures to formally show that, because we're gearing up for FDA approval. So we don't need it, but we do think it would be helpful to reach more people, to get insurance reimbursement, to increase everyone's confidence in the testing, to be able to have that FDA approval. And we imagine our test eventually, so right now it has a lot of parts, but we think eventually it will be just a blood test, like cholesterol testing that you do every year, that is like liquid biopsy for these other tests. So we're showing that it can predict the MRI volumes and it can predict the cognitive testing in this study.
That would be great, because the MRI is kind of expensive and difficult. I guess it's expensive. Go ahead.
And some people are claustrophobic, or they have a piece of metal in their body that's a contraindication for going in. So there's a lot of reasons why you maybe wouldn't want an MRI. I will say that it is the closest to what we actually care about, which is it's directly measuring brain volume, and all neurodegenerative diseases are loss of neurons in particular parts of the brain. And so the volume is approximating that neuron loss. So it's really close to what we actually care about, which makes it a really good predictor. But I do think having something that's affordable, accessible, you can, just take a home blood test or take a blood test in the doctor's office every year, will be a really good, quick and easy entry point for people to start tracking their brain aging.
It would be. So is there any negative impact of taking an MRI? Like if you do an X-ray, okay, it causes some DNA damage. Does MRI have similar impacts?
No, not a non-contrast MRI. So we don't use any radiation or contrast. If you did use the contrast, there is like a slight increase in cancer risk associated with that in the same way any of CT or any of these contrast associated scans or X-rays. MRIs without contrast are just large magnets. And so you're just being put into a magnetic field, and they're safe to repeat yearly or as many times as you'd like, really.
Do you see, excuse me, do you see any correlation between like epigenetic age as measured by methylation and the brain age?
Yeah, so this in the original study I was telling you about out of my work out of MIT, we also looked at the original Horvath clock. So version one, there's been versions after that. And we looked at whether that could predict our clock and whether it could predict Alzheimer's and whether it could predict Parkinson's risk. And our clock was much better than that clock as a predictor. We're not the first people to show that the brain actually ages in a really different way than overall body age. So in particular, it's important to have a clock that's specific to the brain. And so we did show that it was a much worse predictor to use the overall clocks. Now, we didn't try any of the later generation clocks. We're doing that now as part of the Alzheimer's drug discovery study. We have a panel of 6 clocks we're testing out from the Clock Foundation. It includes PhenoAge and GrimAge and Dunedin Pace and all of the next generation clocks.
Where is your service offered? Because you need, at the moment, you need the MRI and the blood markers.
Yeah, we're partnered with more than 300 MRI clinics around the world. So we're in most US states and Canada and UK, Poland and Australia,
Okay.
and rapidly expanding.
Cool. So if we want to preserve our brain as long as we can, because it seems like aging is inevitable for the brain anyway at the moment, what are the best things that we can do? So we've got, what, 60% genetic, which sounds not so good, actually. But we do have our 40% we can play with. So what are the key things that we can do to maintain our brain?
Yeah, and it's actually a rosier picture than you might think. So we looked at people that had 1 or 2 ApoE4 alleles. That's a really common genetic risk factor that people have for Alzheimer's. And if you're 5 years younger and you're brain aging, you can mitigate that risk entirely. So even our ApoE44 folks that were 5 years younger were below the average person's risk for Alzheimer's. And that's doable. That's about 1 standard deviation from the mean is 5 years. And so that's the equivalent of getting a B in brain aging. So you just have to be a bit above average. And it's really, I think, achievable for most people. And the big ways to reverse or slow down your brain aging, we call them the 9 pillars. So there's exercise, diet, sleep, staying mentally active, lowering stress. So community, so social interactions are really important, general health, mental health, and avoiding environmental toxins like microplastics and pesticides.
Okay, can we?
And
Yeah, sorry.
yeah,
Can we dive into a little bit more detail on a couple of those? So exercise is great for the brain just because it gets blood flowing and it helps with BDNF. Do you know anything about the type of exercise? You know, HIIT or just zone 2 or resistance training or?
yeah. So you mentioned BDNF.
Yeah.
That's super important. And the higher your heart rate gets, the more likely you are to release BDNF from exercise. So we really recommend that if you can tolerate it, to be in zone 3 or zone 4. So HIIT is great for that. But really, any exercise people do has an effect. So there's been randomized control trials on every type of exercise, and doing some exercise is much better than no exercise for any of these, for preventing Alzheimer's in general. So we would suggest do the exercise that makes you happy and that you're actually going to do. But if you had to pick one, I'd say, really get your heart rate up.
So sleep as well is not just like the length of sleep; it's also the quality of sleep that matters because it cleans out the brain. Um, so, yeah, is there anything that we could track for our sleep that would be a key predictor?
Yeah, so I have an Aura ring. I'm a big fan of Aura. So I think the first step to getting better sleep is to track your sleep. So with some sort of wearable device, we know the sweet spot is 7 to 8 hours. And to get really high quality deep sleep and good sleep architecture. So Aura ring actually gives you a little chart of how much deep sleep you get and how much REM sleep and how much light sleep. And so you can see if your sleep architecture is ideal. So, I think best practices for sleep are avoiding blue light at night, making sure it's quiet, making sure the temperature is cool enough, um, avoiding noises. There's some evidence for magnesium, threonate for sleep, as well as melatonin. I found that I personally have completely fixed my sleep through actually adding hormone replacement therapy to my life. So I'm 44, I'm perimenopausal, and I started to have bad sleep in my late 30s even. I was waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning, four times a week. And I thought it was stress related because I'm a startup founder. And that, can obviously make sleep worse. And then I just did started to do some reading and realized that sleep is a big component of changes in hormones for women in midlife, and went on hormone replacement therapy, and it has entirely fixed my sleep. I wake up maybe once a month now at 3 or 4 in the morning. So it's been a big game changer. So now I'm trying to sing it from the rooftops, tell all the women that, this could really change your life because having better sleep is really, really important for preventing Alzheimer's.
Yes. Uh, I did want to talk about, yeah, I'm just afraid we could go down a long rabbit hole there. Um, so, but that is really interesting that hormone replacement therapy has such a big effect on your sleep, but also the your risk for Alzheimer's because women in general get more Alzheimer's. They have a higher risk.
Yes, and I would not be surprised if that was tied back to hormones through sleep in part. So, I mean, also having symptoms of perimenopause are worse for getting enough exercise, worse for your energy. They sort of make all of the lifestyle best practices harder, right?
Uh,
So it's hard to know exactly at which level that hormone replacement therapy is helpful for preventing Alzheimer's, but I could see it working on multi different levels to help people with Alzheimer's prevention. And it's a real disservice that the press and the way the original Women's Health Initiative study was interpreted that made women and their providers scared to take hormone replacement therapy for the last 20 years because all of those women have missed out on those benefits because it's really only safe to start hormone replacement therapy within 10 years of menopause, so somewhere between 40 and 60. And so the women that are now 60 or older, it's probably not safe for them to now start HRT. So I think there was a real disservice done by that study. And now we're trying to get in the US FDA to remove the black box warning from HRT. I think that would be
what
a really
is
good step forward.
it would? So what is the problem with uh, women over 60 having starting HRT?
Well, that was part of the reanalysis of the original Women's Health Initiative data.
Mhm.
So there were a few problems with that study. One was that a lot of the HRT was started in women over 60, so they had not had hormone replacement therapy for that whole time, and then were started on it. It also wasn't bioidentical, so it was horse equine like derived hormones So that also has worse outcomes when they looked at newer data with hormones that were made in a different way that weren't synthetic in that way. So when they reanalyzed the data, they showed that in the subpopulation of women that were started within 10 years of menopause, there was actually a decrease in cardiovascular disease. There's a decrease in dementia risk, a decrease in all of these risk factors that people were looking at. And so now when now the recommendation has been updated to say that within 10 years, it's actually very safe for women. But if you started after that, the data looks worse. So that was part of the problem with the original analysis.
Okay. So is there any training we can do for the brain? So do you think meditation helps? Do you have any evidence for that?
Yeah, there's a few studies, randomized control studies of people looking at meditation and brain volume and dementia risk. And there's small studies, but there's increasing evidence that that's helpful. And stress reduction is certainly helpful for preventing dementia in the future, which meditation helps with. So yes, but we're starting at NeuroAge to run a study using our way of looking at the NeuroAge test for brain aging and meditation practice. So we're starting a little study on that ourselves right now.
So what about brain games? So I saw you have some brain games, and I did those on your website. Thank you. That was quite fun.
Great.
Although just when I mean, there's tricks for memory, right? The word association, or not association, actually, like just the word matching. If you study memory, it's like, so there was strawberry and sister, I think. Oh no, jam and sister were one of the pairs. So I just imagine my a sister. I don't have a sister, but she's covered in jam, right? So that helps me remember.
Mm-hmm.
So but that would give me a better score. So it's not because my memory is better, it's because I have a better technique. Do you see that as like a confounder?
Yes and no. So you are correct. That is the way to do well in word pair. So if anyone out there wants to do our cognitive testing, that is the trick to how to do well in that game. But even if you take into account those tricks, they're still much harder for people that are having cognitive decline or having early stage dementia. Even with those tricks, would not be able to do those games. So the word pairs game is 12 pairs of words like sister and jam, and then you see the first word and you have to type in the second word. So the Alzheimer's test, that's the equivalent of this. So this is like 10 times what an Alzheimer's actual test would be, is something called delayed recall. And it's just 3 words. So you say, hat, clock, and wall. And then they ask 10 minutes later, what were those words? And so people with Alzheimer's will not be able to remember all of those words. So this is like the much, much harder version of that. But, there are tricks to them, and people can actually do better on our cognitive testing over time. So we see that with all of the testing, and I think that's a feature and not a bug. So we actually encourage people to take the tests over and over again and try to do better on them. There's been studies that show that the ability to improve on the testing is also a predictor of how you're doing with dementia risk. So you can also look at that, how people do over multiple trials.
So is that because you're getting more skilled at the game, or because you're improving your memory? Or do you know?
Well, I think it's just so for the memory portion of it, I think it's just a marker of how well you're doing right now, your ability to improve on those games. But for reaction time, there actually is some remarkable studies showing that if you train your reaction time, you can decrease your dementia risk by almost 30%, so 29%. So there is pretty large size clinical trial that followed people over 10 years, and they got 15 hours of reaction time training. So they trained their reaction time for just 15 hours, and then 10 years later had this reduction in dementia risk. And this was like randomized double-blind controlled trial. So it was really well done. That's a bigger effect than any of the Alzheimer's drugs that are approved right now. So I'm trying to tell people that, get really fast in your reaction time, go play pickleball, do the reaction time game online, play ping pong, because that actually has this giant effect on your risk for dementia in the future. Now, the evidence for training memory is less good. So I will say that that is more specific to you just getting better at the specific thing you're working on and not preventing dementia in the future. So it seems to be specific to the reaction time game.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, that sounds good. And I've just kind of started pickleball, so that's good.
Oh, great.
So thinking about diet, so a few questions on kind of diet. So well, let's start with, are there any specific diet that you think is good for the brain?
Yes. So the diets with the most evidence are Mediterranean and Mayan diets. So these are high in vegetables and fruit and olive oil and good fats and omega-3 rich foods like seafood. So those have the most evidence, but there are other diets that, have clinical trial, like early clinical data to support them as well. So Dean Ordish had a study that he published in 2024 showing that people with early stage Alzheimer's or mild cognitive impairment, which is cognitive decline that's sort of like pre-Alzheimer's, were able to increase their memory by 18% just through lifestyle alone. And the diet associated with that study was a vegan diet. So it did have high in fruits and vegetables in this same way, but it wasn't specifically Mediterranean. And then I know you were asking me before this call a little bit about keto. So I did do some digging into the keto literature, and it does seem like there is some small studies that maybe support ketogenic diet for dementia prevention, although I'd say they're not as many and not as rigorously done as the Mediterranean and Mind diet studies.
Do you have any data on kind of mild alcohol use? So just a few drinks a week. Does it have any impact?
Yeah, so in what we've seen in UK Biobank, which is this beautiful data set run by the UK government, they have more than 500,000 people in it, and all kinds of data from people's health habits to imaging data to functional outcomes. And what they showed in repeatedly in studies coming out of that cohort is that people that are light drinkers are slightly less at risk for dementia, and particularly with red wine. But there have been other studies that have shown no effect or maybe a slightly deleterious effect. So I would say, a small amount of preferably red wine might be good. It might be neutral. So, but definitely moderate or heavy drinking is bad for dementia risk.
Yes. Okay. Are there any supplements that you would recommend? So you kind of mentioned omega-3s, but are there anything else like phosphatidylcholine, any supplements that you think?
Yeah, there's some pretty good well, definitely people should optimize their vitamin D level. So there's a U-shaped curve with that one. So too much is bad, too little is bad for vitamin D. So people should get tested for the vitamin D level. Lots of people are deficient, be in the normal range. There's a number of studies that support that. Omega-3 is actually better to get through your diet than it is as a supplement pill. So they've done side-by-side studies of fish oil capsules versus just getting it from diet. And it's actually more protective to get it from your diet. That's commonly found in fatty fishes, but it's also found for the vegetarians out there in walnuts and flaxseed. So I actually have a recipe for omega-3 banana bread, which is has walnuts in it, and it replaces some of the flour with ground flaxseed. So that's I think even just 6 walnuts a day can give you your daily serving of omega-3s. So that's one I would definitely recommend as a diet and more of a dietary thing. there's some pretty good evidence for curcumin turmeric supplements, and that's actually the opposite. So that's better to get as a supplement because the bioavailability for the brain is not very high just from diet. Of course, eating curries or other things with curcumin, turmeric in them still good for you, but it's probably not going to quite get up to the level that you need to see the supplementation. And then there's some others that are sort of less human evidence, but good evidence in mice. So things like ECGC, which is green tea extract. Also, some of the compounds found in dill and parsley and lovage, so lysoglutide. So there's some evidence for those as well.
So these things will perhaps slow down the brain aging. So do we see that there's anything we can do to actually reverse, to help kind of grow new neurons in the brain?
Yeah, this is the incredible thing. There's evidence that has come out just in the past couple of years that we've seen people actually reversing signs of brain aging and early dementia. So a friend of mine ran a study out of University of Washington looking at people that were on exercise versus not and brain MRI longitudinally. And they showed with just 25 extra minutes of exercise a week, people were able to increase their brain volume on MRI. So they're literally growing back their brain. So if you get a NeuroAge test and you see some of your brain volume is below average or, less than where you would want it to be, even just getting an extra 25 minutes of exercise, you may be able to get retested and show that you've moved that needle and increased the volume. So that's one thing. There's also now there's randomized controlled studies that are about to be published, but there's an anecdote from a gentleman in Florida who was really high risk for Alzheimer's. So he had two ApoE4 alleles. And even in his 50s, he was already testing positive for those toxic proteins that build up in the brain, amyloid and tau. And he underwent dramatic lifestyle improvements, really went at it with exercise and diet and lost a bunch of weight and did all the things you're supposed to do and got retested and showed that he was no longer testing positive for those toxic proteins, which is really remarkable. So actually reversing those signs. And we're now seeing that there was some conference papers of neurologists showing on a larger scale that this was true for people, that they were able to do this, reverse amyloid and tau. It's the same way you can lower your cholesterol, right, with lifestyle intervention.
Yeah, that's really hopeful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So NeuroAge research at the moment, you're doing this brain aging, which you call what, delta age?
We call it NeuroAge.
NeuroAge. Okay, NeuroAge.
Right on the money with the name of the company. Yeah.
And you're gathering data. Are you and you're participating in some trials. So what's the kind of direction going forward? And what do you intend to use the data for?
Yes. So right now we are giving people personalized recommendations based on their genetics, based on what we see on MRI. So there are studies that show, particular interventions will increase hippocampal volume versus frontal cortex volume, or particular genetic factors. You might be better off with this type of exercise or this type of supplement. So we're able to give people those recommendations right now based on what we know from the literature and their biomarkers. But the goal of the company is to be able to take, first of all, to be able to take all of the data that of people that have been able to lower their brain aging in the NeuroAge test, and then match that with their biomarkers and genetics, and then be able to use AI to feed that back to people and say, people with your biomarker profile do better with zone 2 cardio than weightlifting, or do better with this supplement. So we've created a personalized plan for you based on what we know about how other people were able to lower their brain aging. So that's step one. That's maybe like 1 to 2 years from now, we'll be able to start giving people those really personalized recommendations. And then longer term, and we've just begun to work on this, we can also use causal AI to figure out, okay, not only how fast your brain is aging, but why. So which genetics is contributing to that, which biomarker is contributing to that. And then we can design drugs that are specific to people's biomarker profiles that are causing the brain aging. So that's really the long-term vision, are these personalized therapeutics for people. So we know not all Alzheimer's is the same, just like not all cancer is the same. And so we've really made leaps forward in the oncology field by having drugs that are personalized to people's cancer biomarkers. And we need the same thing with Alzheimer's disease.
So do you think like having a drug to reduce the amyloid is a good, well, is it a step forward? Should we be trying to reduce the amyloid through pharmacological methods?
I do think so. I do think so. But I think the drugs that we have right now have a little bit too risky of a side effect profile for to be used as a prevention. So about 20% of people with these anti-amyloid antibody therapies have brain bleeding or swelling, which can be fatal. And it requires that you get scanned by imaging frequently. So I think this is, the beta version of these drugs. But what's going to be coming down later, and many companies are working on this, are pill forms. So in the same way GLP-1s are injections right now, we're going to have the pill form coming out soon in the next couple of years. I think we're going to have the same thing for the amyloid drugs. And if those have a less of a side effect profile, then maybe that can be more like a statin. So we can start taking those preventatively if they're safe enough. So I do think that companies are working on that. And that's going to be helpful, but it's just one risk factor amongst many. So we're going to need additional medications for people who have different subtypes of Alzheimer's, or their Alzheimer's is being driven by some other process.
Just one thing on the diet I wanted to go back to actually after. So GLP-1 agonists, I think, have shown some data that they also improve your dementia risk. Is that correct? And do we know why?
Yes. So I believe that GLP-1 agonists are maybe the first longevity drug that we have. And I think they're already here. And the reason I say that is they affect multiple age-related diseases. And and there's also evidence, at least in mouse studies, that they are affecting aging itself. So they are working through a pathway called PI3 kinase. This is a really famous longevity pathway, and they prevent cell death in your pancreas, which is the organ that produces insulin. That's part of their effect in being good for diabetes. And they also prevent cell death in the brain, at least in mice. So they're able to prevent neurons from dying. And it's through this longevity pathway. And we're seeing the first evidence come out that these drugs are really helpful for dementia risk. So we don't have the results of GLP-1s versus control in people without diabetes yet, although those studies are going to be run. But what we do have is people on a different diabetes medication versus GLP-1s, two populations with diabetes. And what they showed is, even though the diabetes was equally well controlled and it was matched for weight, so it wasn't just a weight loss effect, the people on the GLP-1s had less dementia risk than the people on the other diabetes drug. And so that would lead us to believe that, independent of diabetes, independent of weight loss, that the GLP-1s are protecting for dementia. But we need more evidence. And if it's as big of an effect as it was in that study, it would be better than the amyloid drugs, and certainly safer and has additional benefits. So that would be huge.
Yes. What do you see coming into the clinic? So things that are in research now that will be coming into the clinic in the near future. Do you have any particular things that you're looking at there?
Yeah, so there's many drugs that are being worked on beyond amyloids. The field has really was stuck on amyloid drugs for a long time. So there's additional toxic proteins. So tau is another one. So there are anti-tau drugs that are being tested right now. One that I'm actually pretty interested in is nicotine is being tested currently. Um, and it's funny because if you go to these longevity talks, a lot of people will talk about the super centenarians, which are people that live past age 110. The most famous of which is Jean Calment, who's the oldest woman to ever live. She's a French woman that lived to 122. And there's pictures of her, in her, past 100 smoking cigarettes. And she started smoking, I guess, when she was 112 or something. And you see that actually these super centenarians are more likely to be smokers than the average person. And how could that be? And it turns out that, smoking is definitely very bad for heart disease. It's bad for cancer risk. It's bad for all kinds of things. But if you can avoid those problems, it's actually good for the brain. It's a nootropic. So it's really like the delivery method that's a problem. Nicotine itself is actually quite good for neurons. It enhances memory. And so you see less Parkinson's prevalence in smokers, for instance. And so it's being tried in clinical trials, not as a cigarette form, as a patch form for dementia treatment. So that's one thing that I think is pretty interesting. It's going to have a PR problem for sure to try to get people's brains wrapped around around that. Yeah, I think if I had Alzheimer's, I would consider, a nicotine patch myself. So that's one thing. There's also a drug called Gal-3 that's against galactin-3 that has been approved for emergency use. So this is a glycoprotein targeted, and it's been approved by FDA before completing phase 3 clinical trials for emergency use authorization for Alzheimer's. And so that drug is also pretty interesting. People can buy it out of pocket right now in certain places. It's quite expensive, so it's not available to everyone, large out-of-pocket costs. But it has had efficacy in phase 2, and you can get it early before the phase 3 trials are over. So that's one to definitely keep a lookout for as well.
Thinking of nootropics in general, so I mean, caffeine is a nootropic, but modafinil or these kind of things, they help you at least in the short term? They help the brain. Do they have long-term bad effects, or do we know?
I don't think we have the data for that yet to really understand the long-term effects of these nootropics. Caffeine, well, we at least know that coffee is associated with longer lifespan and with less risk of dementia. That's been shown quite often, as well as tea. But the thinking is that that's more to do with what's in the coffee beans, the antioxidants, and in the tea leaves than it is to do with the caffeine itself. Yeah, I don't think we really have enough long-term data on some of these other nootropics to really know whether they're useful.
Yeah.
Are you of any of any of these yourself? Can I ask you that?
Only caffeine. No. Yeah, I love caffeine, but well, I love coffee, but no, nothing else.
Yeah.
But I was, yeah, just thinking about that. Okay, so if we were looking at practical takeaways, what would be like 3 practical takeaways for the best for your brain?
Yeah, so I would say, the last 2 years have seen really great evidence that brain aging is certainly, you can slow it down. You might even be able to reverse it. And so take the bull by the horn, start tracking. So the first step to making changes is tracking where you are. And they're really, you can have a big impact on that 40%. And then lifestyle, of course, has the biggest impact of anything. So we have a little lifestyle quiz. A lot of people tell me their lifestyle is completely optimized, and then they take our lifestyle quiz, and there are things that are not optimized for sure. So know where you are with your lifestyle. And a lot of times, especially we see high powered people in their careers, CEOs that, are eating well and they are exercising, but their sleep is not great and their stress levels are very high and they're not getting as much community time as they should because they're working all the time. So those things are really important. So definitely, try to make small changes in the areas that are going to have the biggest impact for you. And then train your reaction time. Go play pickleball.
Okay,
um,
yeah, no, that's good. Uh, I was just thinking, so there are now blood tests that look at amyloid. Well, with that they attempt to estimate the amyloid, right? Um, is that something people should do to look at what? I mean, how good is that at estimating the state of your brain?
yeah, so it's one risk factor. It's specific to Alzheimer's. So it's not um, brain aging in general. So our testing is testing risk for also for Parkinson's and frontotemporal dementia and all of the other things. So that test is specific to Alzheimer's. It does start to go up 30 years ahead of time. That's before you see any cognitive changes. So those cognitive changes are one of the what's known as a lagging indicator. So they're one of the last things to change. You'll see changes in these proteins long before that. I am gonna go get one of those tests myself sometime soon. I don't expect it to be positive at my age, but you never know. And I think now that we know that those changes are able to be slowed down or reversed, it maybe the biggest thing is it'll be a motivator to people to really work hard if they're starting to see those changes already.
Yes. Okay, so
Yeah.
if people want to find out more, and if they want to take the test or they want to get their brain age done, so where should they go?
Yeah, so you can just go to our website, neuroagetx.com. And there you can just buy the test directly. We send you for a local MRI, you take the blood test and saliva test at home. We send you a kit in the mail, and the cognitive testing can be done online on our website. You can test your reaction time for free actually right now. So anyone can go and do that, and you'll start to get personalized recommendations the more pieces of the test that you do. So you don't have to do all of it at once. You can maybe just start with the cognitive testing, or if you've had your genetic sequence somewhere else, maybe just analysis of your DNA, and you'll start to get more and more recommendations the more parts that you do.
Okay, so you can separate out the MRI because that seems like the hardest piece to get done, but you could do the other pieces.
Yes,
Okay,
you can do the other pieces, and the more pieces you do, the more accurate it becomes and the more recommendations that you get. But any piece of it will start you on the process of um, understanding where you are with your brain aging, give you a result that gives you a ballpark, and start hooking you into ways that you might reduce your brain aging more.
okay, cool. I will link to all of that in the description. So, Dr. Glorioso, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been great talking to you.
Thank you so much, Richard. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.